This is Chicago Indian Arts Podcast, and I am Sarveshi Shukla, your host and board member for Chicago Indian Arts. There's a particular kind of storytelling that requires the author to hold two worlds at once. The world of the past, with its violence, its losses, the specific weight of its silences, and the world of the present, which is still trying to understand what it inherited. To move between them without collapsing either, to find in the space between them what is still alive. Jai Chakrabarti has been doing exactly that. His debut novel, A Play for the End of the World, follows a Holocaust survivor from Warsaw Ghetto to rural West Bengal in 1972, where the same Bengali play by Rabindranath Tagore that was staged in the orphanage weeks before the children were taken to Treblinka is being staged again. This time for Bangladeshi refugees during the Naxalite uprising. His story collection, A Small Sacrifice for Enormous Happiness, moves between Kolkata and New York across generations, across the fierce human need to make family against all kinds of odds. He was born in Kolkata. He lives in New York. He's two-time O. Henry Prize winner, a Pushcart Prize winner, and the winner of National Jewish Book Award for the debut fiction. His work has been longlisted in PEN Faulkner Award and finalist for the Rabindranath Tagore Prize. He teaches at the Bennington Writing Seminars. He writes in English out of history and longing for the readers worldwide who feel the weight of both. And he's now turning his attention to one of the most extraordinary figures in Indian and world history, a subject that connects directly to the ground we are sitting here in Chicago. Welcome to Chicago Indian Arts, Jai. I'm so glad to have the amazing Jai Chakrabarti with us here today.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Sarveshi. I'm really, really happy to be with you today.
This is our pleasure. I'm so glad you agreed. I love to start our conversations with our amazing authors at the origin stories because I feel that that plays a significant role in who they are. You grew up in Kolkata, a city with an extraordinary and very specific relationship to literature and ideas, and the luminaries of that culture are endless, and that kind of treatment of artistic and intellectual work is almost taken as a serious civic responsibility there. I want to begin there before America. What was your childhood like? What did Kolkata give you that you feel maybe other places wouldn't have?
It's such a great question because I do think our origin stories define us and put us on a path toward the lives that we lead, especially the writing lives that we lead. In my case, I am the child of two philosophers who taught at Kolkata University and Jadavpur University, two colleges in Kolkata.
Yeah.
And so not only was I born into a city that really embraced the arts, but I was also raised by two parents who valued the liberal arts, who valued thinking, who valued going to theater, so that was and music. And so I think I'm very grateful for the amount of exposure that I got to the arts as a child. And of course, Kolkata has a very specific relationship to that. And more beyond it, I was given access to storytelling in its different forms. And of course, there's so many Bengali authors and non-Bengali authors I loved as a child, but I had some amazing oral storytellers in my family. So these are folks who could tell the most imaginative things, like I think about my great uncle in this regard, who would just charm all of the children with stories that sometimes were spin-offs from the Mahabharata, sometimes were just his own tales. And from that storytelling, I think he really sparked imagination. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, you need the arts and you just also need communal storytelling. You need people in your life like that who will charm you, who will encourage you to then tell other stories.
That is true. That is true. In fact, I was going to say this later during our discussion, but you brought it up. So, as a part of Chicago Indian Arts, part of our programming for that day in the morning actually begins with children's section and storytelling for children, encouraging them to read and write. And, we have some great collection happening there. And this is so lovely to hear that your childhood was filled with not just reading, but hearing stories and listening to them and, building them in your imagination. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I had a similar upbringing. My parents were both academics as well. Reading was a core part of life. And I think that love is what, brought me to amazing writers and books like what you've written. Coming to now the crossing that you made from Kolkata to the US into a literary world that wasn't really built for people who grew up where you grew up. What did that feel like from the inside? And what did you carry with you? What surprised you when you arrived here? Like, I'm just curious. It's very different world, right?
A very different world indeed. And I think it was perhaps that transition that also helped me become a writer.
Okay.
Because when I came to America, I first came when I was 9 years old. And I didn't, I was very confused with this new world. And I felt that it was in books and in writing that I could have some sense of place, some sense of comfort to go back to over and over again. So, I think this is a common immigrant story, which is that in order for us to situate ourselves between two worlds, we turn to writing or music or some kind of art making in order to help us understand what it is to have two identities in one body. And so because like you, my parents are academics, like we would go back to Kolkata every summer for 3 months. And so I had this unusual childhood where I would spend 9 months in America and 3 months in Kolkata every summer. And so I really never quite felt at home anywhere after that.
Yeah.
And so it was really the page where I felt most at home, where I could write about characters who were between worlds. I could try and be inside of their consciousness and have that sense of intimacy that felt so important.
Wow. I mean, I think you so aptly described the immigrant experience, two identities in one body. It's very beautiful way to put it. That's true. And I love the fact that Paige became your most comfortable presence and persona. It's fabulous. I've been mesmerized by how our geography change impacts us as people and what we make of it. I think what we make of it is the most prominent part. And thank you for doing what you did. I want to go to your novel, which it's clearly one of those books where I've highly recommended it to people who love reading. It's very intense, very deep. I want to start with the historical heart of that novel because I think a lot of people who I spoke to did not know this part of the story. They should. In 1942, a few weeks before the Nazis deported the children of Janusz Korczak's orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka, Korczak staged a production of Bengali play by Rabindranath Tagore called The Dagghar or the Post Office as a way to help those children face what was coming. I got goosebumps even as I'm saying it now. A Bengali play in a Warsaw ghetto as a final act of love. I mean, that connection itself is extraordinary. How did you find it? And when you did, what did it mean to you? Like, what did you know you wanted to do with it?
Yes, it is truly an extraordinary story, and I wish everyone knew about this incredible confluence of cultures and of art making and resistance. And I was first exposed to it when I was living in Jerusalem now a number of years ago. My partner is the poet Ilana Bell, and she and I were in Jerusalem, and we had gone to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum. And there, in an exhibit called Art in the Ghettos, I learned about the story of Janusz Korczak, who not only put on a play for these orphans literally weeks before deportations in the worst of conditions, in a moment in which everyone was scared and, suffering in all the worst ways. And he chose to turn to art making in that moment, which is extraordinary. And it's also extraordinary to consider that he chose to turn to a play from a Bengali playwright. He was actually quite well versed with Indian arts and letters. He was very familiar with like the Mahabharata, for instance, and was somebody who kept a meditation practice. So he's a very worldly individual, and he believed in the power of art as a way of not only creating resistance, but also of bringing people together, of helping the children prepare for what was to come, because at that point, it was very clear that the situation was quite dire for them. And so when I learned this story, I felt that I felt transformed in a way. I felt it was a kind of epiphanic moment where if I write nothing else, I must write this story because it felt so important to me, and I became obsessed with the history of that time. And if there's ever a reason to write about something, I would say it's to follow the sense of obsession that a writer might get. And I became very, very moved by it. I spent time in Poland researching that history, studying with scholars of that time. And of course, I spent time in Shantiniketan, where the play was originally written by Rabindranath, and trying to understand his mindset and why he wrote it when he did. And I knew that the story that I could write wasn't purely the story of the Warsaw Ghetto. That is not my story to write. But the story that I wanted to write was the story that translated across from Warsaw to India, in which the play that was originally written in a village in India then comes back after visiting Poland back into its roots, so to speak. So that was the story that I followed, and the one that I tried to write.
It's a fabulous story. And, I'm glad you took that walk to the museum that day because it's an incredibly powerful story in all its form, wherever it travels. And that's what my next question would be about, that it's structurally remarkable. The same Bengali play appears twice, and it's 30 years apart in completely different political crisis in both the situations. In Warsaw in 1942, it prepares those poor children for death. In West Bengal in 1972, it is used to protect the Bangladeshi refugees, to draw the world's attention to a village facing political violence. Same words, completely different meaning, completely different stakes. Was that parallel something you found in history or something you kind of, constructed? And what does it say about the art, actually, that the same words can do such a different work across different sufferings?
Oh, yes, yes. And I think this is such an important part about theater in general, which is that you can take a play like a play from Shakespeare, like Hamlet, for instance, and find within it so many different expressions to meet the moment. And we see this in this country in Bread and Puppet, for instance, in that performance group. But in India, we see it all the time. And one of the influences for this book was Safdar Hashmi, who was,
Yes.
a playwright, but also an activist, and he put on plays in the streets of Delhi,
Right.
and that were attended by thousands of people, right? And
Right.
so so this notion that art making can be a way to change the vocabulary of a situation is something that I really learned from Hashmi's work that, hey, we can take this play, we can put it outside, we can bring people together. And that was something I wanted to retain once we got to the Bengal section of the novel, that it could be, it could go from a preparation toward death, as you say, to a much more active sense of resistance.
Wow. I mean, you brought up Safdar Hashmi. He is a legend in his own right, and
Yeah.
someone who I think he made art very accessible. He
Hmm.
literally brought it to the streets, connected it to people in general. So it wasn't
Yeah.
confined in a stage for the elites. It was everyone's to have. Oh my God, this is amazing to hear that he played such a critical part in what you were writing.
Yes.
Your main character, Yarrick Smith, carries the weight that most people will never know. The only child taken on the train to Treblinka who escaped, spent 30 years in New York trying to build a life. And at the center of the novel is this question. And as I'm talking about it, I'm feeling breathless. It's the question whether, he's allowed to be happy, whether the happiness is a betrayal to the people who didn't survive. And I found that so painful and so recognizably human when you were writing him. It's such a difficult thing to put on paper. What did what did you come to understand about that kind of guilt?
Well, firstly, it was very difficult for me to write in his point of view, and I I needed to really develop a number of practices to be able to write close to Yarick's point of view, because he really has gone through this extraordinary trauma, and what he carries is is unimaginable in so many ways. And he is afraid of a certain kind of happiness, of a certain kind of comfort, because he was raised with such love, and he was raised with such honor and dignity, in the sense of Janusz Korczak, for instance, or Madame Steffa, who was one of his great friends and wards of the orphanage. And with the both of them, they really chose to stay with the children in in this terrible circumstance when they could have left. And so I think he carries around the weight of his teachers' magnanimity, his teacher's incredible generousness toward the children. And he's afraid that there's no way that he can return that to the world. And I think he's also afraid of a certain kind of forgetting. He's afraid that he will forget what they have given to him. And so this is an incredible burden that he carries that prevents him from finding intimacy, finding love. And that's really the thing that he has to work through in the story.
Fascinating. I mean, to be able to write that kind of character, it requires and intellect par excellence, which obviously, you've carried over the years. Beautiful work. Now I want to come to your story collection that moves between Kolkata and New York, across generations, across the fierce human desire to make a family, sometimes in circumstances that makes that desire almost impossible. The title story is set in 1980s Kolkata. A man who wants to raise a child with his closeted lover. Heartbreaking, funny, and very alive. What drew you to that as the opening story, as that became the premise of the entire collection? Like, it became a very centerpiece.
Yes, thank you. And I will say that the title has some degree of irony that it comes with.
True, true.
So, we now have a child of our own, and I can tell you that it's not a small sacrifice. There are
True.
many joys that come with it, but the level of sacrifice at times can be significant. I think every parent can perhaps agree to that. Um, and and sometimes the happiness is truly enormous, and it's blissful, but also it can be quite murky and can be quite nuanced. And I think with all of the characters in this collection, they are wrestling with fairly weighty sacrifices. And oftentimes they are struggling with this notion of duty, struggling against societal expectations. In the title story, for instance, you have a fairly wealthy man who is not supposed to be in a relationship with another man, and he's struggling with that. And is he going to adhere to the societal expectations that have been put upon him, or is he going to push through and try to find a deeper love? How is he going to manage that? So I am really drawn to these moments of fundamental tension where the expectations that are being put upon us are inconsistent with where our hearts want to go. And do we then follow our heart, or do we bend and do what we are supposed to do? I'm really interested in those inflection points in our lives, in those moments of tension.
I love what you observe in everything around you, because I think we all live through those tensions and those moments, but to be able to see that and then capture it beautifully on a page, to translate that, is, I think that's what makes it so relatable to the people around. That, yeah, I know this feeling, like, even if there aren't words that we all have in the way you have, it makes it a very engaging read. Like, none of the books I've been able to say, okay, I'm going to come back to it, and it's like, I have to finish this. I just have to read it because it's so amazingly written. Love it.
Thank you.
The New Yorker wrote that your stories leave the characters suspended between unbearable truths, salvation or suffering. I felt that as I was reading it. Like I said, I may not have had the words that New Yorker beautifully put it, but that's what I was feeling. That these characters want things so deeply, and the collection almost never lets them fully arrive at that. Is that a deliberate formal choice, or that's simply how you see the shape of life around you?
I think it's all of the above. I do think that we in our lives, at least in my life, right? I observe so many people who are caught in this incredible between this incredible pull of many, many directions. And so there, I can almost imagine that there's arms, many arms pulling on us from all these sources. And how do we manage those tensions? More formally, as I'm at the moment working on a lecture about endings and thinking about um, Indian aesthetics, and this notion that comes from, rasa theory and some of the work that Abhinavagupta developed, there's this idea that in an ending, you have a dominant emotion, but you also have a number of other emotions that come with it as well. And so when an ending really lands, it's not because, let's say, the dominant emotion is sadness, for instance. It's not just because we feel some sense of sadness, it's also because we feel the opposite of that emotion as well at the same time. So, for instance, there's a story in that collection called Lilavati's
Yeah.
Fire. And
Yeah.
the ending of that piece is one that I worked on a lot, and because I really was trying to get at this notion of the opposing emotions in the same moment. And at the end of that story, the main character is bereft to a degree because she's tried to make an airplane and
Yeah.
she has failed. But she remembers nonetheless this moment from her past, which fills her with a sense of life and possibility. So I am drawn naturally to those endings, and it was not until I really went back to rasa theory and really studied it where I could find words and a kind of taxonomy toward why I was drawn to those kinds of endings.
Two quick things I wanted to share with you, which is completely not how I planned our script, but long time ago, someone I was talking to, and they were like, why don't you write what you feel? And everyone who can who gets an A in English will think, oh yeah, yeah, one day I can, but that's not true. First of all, um, and the biggest thing that if ever I pick up a pen and put it to paper, I feel I I want to know what the ending would be, and I
Mm.
can never figure it out in my head. That's why, obviously, I don't think I will ever write. But I'm very drawn to this lecture that you're preparing for. Would love to attend it and hear it because I think it is way harder than people understand it to be. The endings. How do you get to it? And the second thing I quickly wanted to share was I recently finished a book I was reading. It's a very celebrated book. And I can't say I liked the ending, I didn't like the ending, but it just left me where I have not been able to form an opinion about that book.
Mm.
I have not been able to say, oh, I don't like it at all, but I've
Mm.
not been able to stop thinking about it either. So,
Ah.
what you said just now, I was like, maybe that is why. And that's why I would love to attend the lecture on endings. It's so powerful.
Mm. Oh, that's great. I love those observations. And I mean, there's some writers who do start with the ending in their heads, like Amy Hempel, for instance. She knows where the story is going. But for me, oftentimes I don't know the ending, and the ending is part of the discovery. That's part of the joy of the writing itself. So I would encourage you to play with that and to play with that sense of discovery.
I will come to that advice in again a short bit. In the letter that I wrote to you when I wanted us to talk, I told you that what moved me most about the novel was its quiet faith in art, not as a decoration, but as survival memory and resistance. That is also what we are trying to build with Chicago Indian Arts. And I want to ask you this honestly, because I think it's also a question that goes into Jigger's mind, the founder of our organization. It has crossed my mind. I'm sure a lot of our team members think that. Do you actually believe that literature can do that work? Or is it something we tell ourselves because we love books and we need it to be true?
Yes, and I certainly hope it's true. I will say that there have been so many moments in my writing life where I have wondered about this question, where I've wondered, is it is it really a good use of time that I'm sitting down to write as opposed to engaging in various kinds of direct action when I could be doing that? Like, is that, a conflict in terms of my moral compass? And it was incredibly helpful for me to spend the time that I did researching the Warsaw Ghetto. And what I learned from that is really how, in the worst of times, people come back to art, and how, when you have nothing, you are still singing, you're writing poems. There's a story of a famous Yiddish poet who is on the run, who ends up hiding in a coffin, and he's composing a poem in a coffin. So in those stories, it became clear that when everything else is gone, what we have is this art making, right? I think because art making is a kind of meaning making, it's a way in which we can take the meaning, or the sense of meaning that we're feeling, or the lack of meaning that we're feeling, and we can share it with the world, and we can have it be reflected back and shared back. So I think that is so deep in the human psyche that it's unavoidable. Like, I think we can turn away from it, and we can be the worse for that, or we can do what you all are doing at Chicago Indian Arts and really celebrate it and bring people together and encourage a younger generation to also participate.
Ah, that gives me hope that we are at least focused on the right direction. And what you just said, giving the newer, younger generation that same gift that probably we all grew up with. That has been one of the mission objectives for Jigar. Like when he first came up with the idea of the organization, and he sat down to write what will it all be about, that became one of its core principles. And he says it over and over that one day, like years, decades from now, I won't be around, but I want this foundation, this organization, to continue doing that connecting work with the younger generation, and pass on the richness of art that we have seen and we know it exists. It's almost like our responsibility to do so. Thank you for sharing what you shared. Now I'm coming to my most favorite topic, and I have been waiting to talk about this. I've heard you've been working on Swami Vivekananda as your subject. When Jigar and you spoke, and he called me right after, I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to talk, because we are recording this in Chicago. In 1893, the young Vivekananda stood in this city at the world's parliament of religion and addressed the world. His opening words, being "Sisters and Brothers of America," were met with 2 minutes standing ovation before he finished that sentence. So I have to tell you this. I have never felt any, like, I haven't been able to connect with a historical figure ever from any part of the world except for Swami Vivekananda. I don't know what it is about him that it's, I may not have the right words for it. Like, he is someone I cannot shake off. He doesn't even feel like to me that, oh, he completely lives in the past. He feels like I feel him in my consciousness. I feel him in the existence. And I would love to know what drew you to him, because he was a 30-year-old young man with no institution backing him, nothing behind him, and then standing up in front of the world with that kind of confidence and audacity, if I can use that word. What do you think existed inside of him? Like, what loneliness, what fire would have happened inside of this young man?
It is an extraordinary story. He is gifted this this passage to America, but there is no preparation whatsoever for for him when he actually arrives stateside, right? So nobody has been told that here's somebody from India who is an incredible orator. Like there is no institutional backing, as you're noting. And he goes to the Parliament of Religions. They give him the cold shoulder initially, and then he spends some time in America as as something of a destitute, right? Until miraculously he finds the people who believe in him, who see that fire and want to champion his message. And then, even though it's way past the registration deadline and all of these practical things, he is brought forth to America. So it does, he talked about how he felt that it was his karma to really share this message. And that's the sense that I get of his life, that it was this spirit that was so strong in him, and he was willing to listen to that spirit, and he was willing to let it drive his life and his actions, oftentimes at great personal cost. And yet,
Yeah.
he stayed true to his own sense of vision. So yeah, it is extraordinary that you're in Chicago, that I did all this research about the White City and Vivekananda. um, I will say that I have gone through a few drafts of this novel, and initially I started writing it with Vivekananda as the as a chief character. And I realized that he carries so much weight in my own life, because he was an important figure to me, and the work of the Ramakrishna Institute
Yeah.
in general was important to me, that I had to switch to a non-historical figure. A fictional monk of that order comes to America shortly after he does, in order to be able to tell that story. And sometimes, I think in fiction writing, you need to do that. You need to sort of
Of
step
course.
away from the fire a little bit. But yeah, it was so worthwhile to get to do that research and to continue to be in that moment, thinking about the the sharing of cultures and how that changed the history of religion in America.
That is fascinating. And I mean, even if you've moved to a fictional monk, I think the fact that we'll see glimpses of what you've learned during your research, and especially like you said, he's played such a pivotal role. Like I can't wait to read it. And if you don't mind us telling, when do we see this book come out?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, it's still in progress.
Okay, wonderful. Whenever you have it, Chicago Indian Arts, please consider it your home. And we would love to host you and talk to you about it at that time as well. That brings me to the specific premise of Chicago Indian Arts. Um, like the reason we thought of this platform, the reason it mattered so much to Jigar was that we felt that Indian literature, its thought, the philosophy, its depth, its complexity, its civilizational range deserves a very serious, unhurried engagement. The full picture, not the one that has been flattened for consumption, the version that gets very simplified. The work that you've been doing is in the same line. That's what you've carried for so long, holding the complexity of Indian lives across time and geography without collapsing it. For a young Indian American reader or writer who's trying to find that relationship to that inheritance, what do you want them to understand the most?
Yes, and the weight of inheritance can also be a weight that keeps us from coming to the page. So I will say, firstly, that I encourage anything that allows the writer to feel a sense of freedom, that allows the writer to go into areas of risk, of personal risk, of family risk, of generational risk, because I think it's there that we see the most charge and possibility in our writing. And I will say that there is so much in the Indian canon that I wish were part of MFA programs and were part of how we think about literature in America today. And so many books that have been influential for me when I think about a sense of structure, when I think about storytelling and how to play with time, how to play with voice. So I will say that my recommendation to anybody is to write what brings you a sense of joy, to write towards that joy, but also to read and to read in the canon, not only of what comes out in America, but really to go back and look at books and look at the older books in this case and see what gave them vitality.
Wow. Okay. That's great advice. And I would continue that note because I want to take this moment for you to talk to the writers in our audience, in the people who would be attending our literature festival. Imagine someone, young in their 20s, South Asian, maybe second generation, with real talent, but they're being told that their stories are too quiet or too interior and not dramatic enough for the market. They're being told to make it louder and legible and fit for consumption of how the world wants to see India. What do you say to them?
I think that one of the joys of being a writer is that we can write beyond stereotype. We can redefine the ways in which the world sees at least one single person, and then that single person is the projection, of course, of the writer. And so that is one of the gifts, right? That instead of thinking about Kolkata as the city of joy, we can think about Kolkata with its real nuance, with all of its flavors and its challenges and its extraordinary circumstances. And I think that the more we kind of deepen into that sense of nuance, into possibility, the more that we go beyond the first indication of what a place might be, um, the better we're going to get in terms of the outcome, right? So I would say lean into that voice. Don't worry about signals from the market, right? Like eventually people will come around, people will see that the work that you are producing is worthy of recognition. So lean into that spirit of really being your most original and authentic self. And yeah, don't follow others, right? Lean into that sense of your own wisdom.
That's very sage advice. I love that. I think it is very important for our young writers, for emerging writers, or anyone who's taking this on to know that, cut out the noise, focus on what feels right at the moment, and everything else can follow later. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. In closing, I want to ask you that you write about people who carry things across distance: history, love, grief, and the weight of what their families gave up so they could be there. After all of this, the novel, the stories, the work you're doing now, what do you feel that you know about that kind of carrying now, which probably when you started off or, during your early days of writing, you may not have known?
Well, it's such a profound and beautiful question. First of all, thank you for that question.
Thank you. I'm glad.
And the dedication of my first novel is for anyone who's crossed a border in search of a home. And in that context, I think about my grandparents who went from Bangladesh to India before partition, and of so many others in my extended family who have had that same circumstance of crossing a border to try and find a home. And I did not appreciate the weight of that, or even of my own parents who, crossed a border in an airplane, as opposed to my grandparents who really had to cross it on the run with the clothes on their back.
Yeah.
But even for my parents, for whom the crossing was not so dramatic, it is extraordinary to have to restart your life, to to leave everything that you know. And it really fills me with, I suppose, an extraordinary sense of optimism that if they can do it and we can do it, then it means that we are open to a sense of great change within us, right? So going back to Vivekananda, like, going on a ship for months, arriving in America, being willing to spread a message thousands of miles from home. So I am filled, I suppose, with a sense that this is if this kind of if this kind of carriage of culture is possible, then there's a lot to be thankful for going forward.
That's fascinating how you connected that experience of anyone who crosses and leaves where they first started their life to move on and build it all over again. And in the same breath, you were able to bring Vivekananda as an example. And I think that those bridges that you build are so colorful that I can keep listening to this and learning from here. Jai Chakrabarti, novelist, short story writer, and one of the most precise and tender voices writing about the weight of history and the cost of love in contemporary fiction. If you haven't yet, please pick up and celebrate all the works that he has produced for us.
Thank you.
Chicago Indian Arts exists for this kind of dialogue and this kind of conversations. We've handpicked our amazing guests, and they have been generously kind for spending their time and associating with us, giving us all this love and guidance. Chicago Indian Literature Festival is on May 30th, our first public moment, and we are very, very excited about it. So all of you around here, around in Chicagoland area, and anywhere in US, you're welcome to join us. Our tickets are on Zephy, and the details can be found at chicagoindianarts.org. Please like our channel, subscribe it if you like these kind of engaged conversations. We can be found on YouTube at the Chicago Indian Arts channel, and find us on Instagram and become a part of our family. We are hoping to build something new, and it takes a village. Come be our village. Thank you so much. This is Sarveshi Shukla signing off for this week. See you soon with someone very interesting yet again.